These are the top 5 best fights of Kengan Omega for 2024 this year. There have been a total of 44 chapters that came out for today, or as of the making of this video, and we've had about 10 fights if you include the one that we are currently in now between Koga and Yumikahara, and also another one that happened between December and January, which is on my list. So it was a pretty active year in terms of fights and matchups. You can tell me what your top 5 are in the comments below, but let's just start off strong with my number 5, and that is Agito versus Julius. It's no surprise that this is in my top 5 best fights for this year. I think it will probably be on a lot of people's top 5 list, and that is because not only was this one of the most anticipated fights in the Kenganverse ever, because a lot of people were wondering how Julius would actually do against one of the S tiers of the series, which was Agito in this case. What was also good to see was just how entertaining this fight actually was, and I think it is due to a couple of factors, and that is that Julius is more of a brute strength brawler type of character, and Agito, he is an all-rounder, but he's also one of the best strikers in the verse. Couple that with the formless and how that was drawn and the choreography, and you have quite a good combination, even though the fight was one-sided for like most of the fight. And Julius did sort of pick up the pace towards the end, even though it was too late at that point. It still maintained good choreography, great art, and established the verse was getting stronger as a whole. So yeah, an important fight, written pretty well. I think the opponents were quite compatible with one another, and yeah, that's why it's number 5. Number 4 is Gao Lang versus Gerada. Now this fight right here, I very much enjoyed it, and mainly because it seems like a fantasy type of matchup, something that naturally you'd be curious about, how if the best grappler in the verse were to fight the best striker in the verse, what would happen? But besides that, I also think this fight has aged relatively well in comparison to some other fights that happened this year. And that is specifically for Gerada, because I know a few people had criticisms of Gerada's strategy, and that was him choosing to basically stay on the counter and try to catch Gao Lang in his moments of lacking in order to throw him, instead of basically being proactive in the fight. And the strategy does negatively impact the choreography to a certain extent, but with the context of Justin versus Gao Lang and Gao Lang versus Agito, that both went for the strategy of trying to grapple Gao Lang and failing miserably, Gerada's strategy just goes to show that yeah, he was the best grappler, he made the best decision, but that isn't to say that Gao Lang didn't get his shine. I think this fight is probably the most important fight in Gao Lang's career in this series, mainly because it puts him officially on the S tier, because Gerada at this point in the story was firmly established as an S tier fighter because of his defeats, or when he defeated Agito. Because I know most people didn't think Gerada was as strong as Kuroki said he was way back in Kengan vs. Purgatory. So that fight turns out to be one of the most important fights because it helps Gao Lang here. And Gao Lang being confirmed to be someone who does foresight killing and having the tools to go up against the best of the best, even in the case where the compatibility of the fighters was not good, and I think this definitely hurts the fight to a certain extent, Gao Lang still did amazing in that fight, and so big ups to him. Which brings me to my number 3, and that is Nico versus Setsuna. This fight was stuck between December of last year to January of this year. I think most of the chapters happened this year, so I'm counting it as a part of 2024. And I loved this fight. It's really only controversial with Nico fans in particular, and I made quite a few videos on this, but that aside, this is one of the most brutal, solid fights in the entirety of Kengan Omega. Setsuna's performance here definitely made him one of the strongest characters that isn't on the worm side, because he goes high diff against Nico, and Nico needs to take him seriously in order to close off the fight. But besides that, the choreography was pretty good. I think Setsuna, whenever he's in a fight, he just makes the fight look good because of his martial arts style, and seeing him use a little bit of the Gaio style as well was also a neat surprise. But it was also good to see Nico use his version of the Nico style, seeing some new stuff that he has in his toolkit. And even though we didn't get to see everything because we don't see the last few moments of the fight, unfortunately, he performed pretty well, all things considered. So it was a great matchup. It gets points for being quite a brutal fight, like it was a life and death situation for both characters. The art was insane, and the writing, I would say, was pretty good as well. Definitely one of my favorites of the year. Which brings me to number 2, Gao Lang versus Agito. Now this is the finals of the Real Champions tournament, and probably one of the most anticipated rematches in the Kengan verse, and probably the most controversial fight on this list. And I would argue it isn't because of the fight necessarily, it's because Agito ended up winning. Because as I was doing the reviews for each chapter of this fight, a lot of Gao Lang fans were pretty happy with what was happening. It was only until that final chapter when Agito got that flashback and started making plays that were a lot more successful than the other plays that he was doing, which nets him the W, where everyone's opinion kinda shifts. At least in my experience, that's how I saw it for most of what was happening on my channel. But the thing that carries this fight for me more than anything is the characterization of both characters. I think that definitely helped this fight, because the flashbacks that we got of Gao Lang and how he met Rama the 12th and then the 13th, basically understanding his motivation for how he fights and where he comes from, was very good. I think when that chapter came out, when that was revealed, I said, hey look, it's probably very difficult to not root for Gao Lang in that chapter. But I would say the same happened when Agito had his own flashback with Nico. The characterization was very good here. Art-wise, pretty solid, I would say. Choreography-wise, it's a little bit difficult, mainly because both fighters were trying to be more efficient in terms of the strategies that they employed in the fight, and that means there were less flashy stuff going on like there was with Agito versus Julius, where Agito could just do what he wanted there and make the fight look good, entertainment value all the way. But this was a lot more high stakes, so you saw someone like Gao Lang pulling out the God Glow, pulling out his own special striking martial arts, Agito using the dragon shot whenever he can because he's trying to end the fight. He's looking for small gaps to just let it off, and even tries to grapple him early in the match. It was extremely high level. It had signs that the fighters were very much trying to think ahead and make their opponent fall into certain traps, but that also means that the entertainment value that you got was not as high as like the version that Kengan Ashura was, where Agito was playing around for a bit, you know, trying to use boxing, and Gao Lang pulling out his Muay Thai towards the latter parts of the fight. I think that definitely affects how I see this fight for the most part, but overall, still think it's one of the best fights this year. It's literally my number 2. I think this will be the number 1 for most people, and if you've been a fan of the channel, you know by now which one is my number 1 fight of this year, and it is, of course, Agito versus Lo Long. This fight was straight fire. choreography, art-wise. The matchup between Agito and Lolong was pretty good, all things considered. They meshed pretty well together. At their peaks, they could bring out the best of one another. And what I liked the most about it was how it was full throttle all the way. They just started off on gear 5th, bro. Lolong's performance in that fight again was absolutely phenomenal. I think he performed better than Agito. I think he got a lot more hits in. He outplayed him more. But again, Agito's endurance, Agito being one of the strongest strikers in the verse. And Lolong kinda knew that, because when Agito used the dragon shot against his knee, he was like, yeah, probably don't want to get hit by that, which unfortunately he ends up getting hit by one of the dragon shots from a new move that Agito gets in the moment, and that is the twin dragon shot. I'm a bit sad that he lost because I was a Lolong backer, but besides that, which is far more of a personal thing, everything else in this fight worked phenomenally. The only thing that I would say this fight missed a bit more, and what probably would have extended it a little bit more, is maybe a few flashbacks for characterization. Again, I like characterization more than anything, but this fight has so many good points that I just love, because I'm a fan of Lolong, I'm a fan of Agito, and compatibility wise as opponents, they were pretty good. The fight's length wasn't that much of an issue because I understand how it's written. Because of the moves that are in play in this fight, the fight could end in a matter of seconds, because guess what? One person has a dragon shot, the other one has the invisible elbow, which is also quite powerful. And that's just the matter of the fact when it comes to these fights. But yeah, those are my top 5 fights of the year 2024. If you made it this far, don't forget to like and sub, and until next time, take it easy.